What's the haps, chaps? Welcome to a Thursday Collection Connection, where today we're going to forge a connection between two 1991 albums, Pearl Jam's 10 and Fishbone's The Reality of My Surroundings. And no, the fact that they came out in the same year is not in itself the connection, although I suspect maybe it's a certain kind of 1990-1991 thinking that led to the connection. But first, we need to reveal the connection between the last pair of albums, and that was Blur's The Ballad of Darren from this year and Pearl Jam's 10. And it's one of those things where it was guessed correctly by Zep Pearl, perhaps unsurprisingly, with this Pearl Jam fandom. Maybe kind of an apocryphal tale on Pearl Jam's part, the connection being that Blur and Pearl Jam were both made to change their names before they started recording. Blur was going by Seymour, which their label Food did not like and made them choose from a list of other options that they were given, and they chose Blur. And my latest understanding of Pearl Jam originally being called Mookie Blaylock was that they took the name almost at random from a basketball card. Just when they needed a name, they were going to go out on tour, and they had no intention of that being the band name long term. They just needed a name in the moment, and they weren't forced by the label or even by Mookie Blaylock himself to change the name. It was just that they had never intended that to be the name, but they did in fact change it to Pearl Jam before they ever started recording. So that is the connection. Zep Pearl guessed it, and you can check out his channel, also called Zep Pearl. I know he recently made a video about Pearl Jam celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Versus album, where he kind of goes into the music and his memories of the time. So there you go, and with that, let's get on with the show. Alright, so the Collection Connection is a game that I play with my brother. My brother being Plastic Eric over on the Plastic Soundwave Cults channel. And every Monday he shows a record, every Thursday I show a record. And the connective tissue is that those albums are in some way related, and we ask you to guess what that connection is. So in Eric's last video, he showed and talked about Pearl Jam's debut album 10. It is probably the closest I ever got to buying one of those albums of that ilk. I never bought any Nirvana or Alice in Chains or Stone Temple Pilots or Soundgarden or Pearl Jam for that matter, but Pearl Jam's debut album, again, probably the closest that I got to buying it. I was certainly aware of all the hits. Alive is a great track, and Even Flow, Jeremy I'm maybe a little less hot on, but I recognized Black, which was apparently not a single from what I could tell from their discography information, but must have been played on the radio because I definitely remembered it. I wouldn't have been able to come up with the title of it. I would have guessed that it was maybe a later track, but I certainly knew Black. And listening to it, Porch kind of caught my ear. I don't know if that's fan favorite or not, but I thought Porch was pretty good as a track. Now weirdly, it also appeared that the album was not pressed on vinyl until 1994 in the US, even though it came out in 1991. There were a couple of European pressings in the year of 1991, like in Bulgaria I think was one of them. Some really rather odd and random ones, so a couple more in 1992, but not until 1994 in the US. So things had really made the switch over apparently from vinyl, handing the baton briefly off to cassettes for a couple of years in the late 80s, and everything was moving on at that point to the compact disc. And I think maybe today's connection is rooted in that thought of 1990, 1991 passing the baton to the new Goliath of the compact disc. But that's Pearl Jam, that's 10. So that brings us to the album that I was going to talk about today, and that is The Reality of My Surroundings by Fishbone. This is Fishbone's third album at this point. They did Before their first album, they put out a 6-song EP, which is the only other Fishbone that I own, which is actually not true. I think there was a non-album single called Bonin' in the Boneyard, which I have on CD single, so I do have 3 pieces of Fishbone, but I don't have those first 2 albums or anything that followed this album. I think it's a really interesting record because it is regarded in some respect as Fishbone's sort of masterpiece album, which I don't really agree with. It contains 2 of, unquestionably to me, their best songs, Sunless Saturday and Everyday Sunshine. Those are 2 absolutely brilliant songs, fantastic, very different in style. Everyday Sunshine is like a Sly and the Family Stone jam that just kind of gets more chaotic as it goes along, and is very uplifting, whereas Sunless Saturday is very dark and hard rocking, rocks as hard as anything like Living Colour or Faith No More or other bands at the time, Pearl Jam, were coming up with themselves. It's just a really hard rock song. Both fantastic songs, and I love both of them. But I find the album a little hard to listen to because it feels like it's full of bloat. It's got 4, I think, different tracks called If I Were a ... I'd, which are sort of live concert snippets, which take anywhere from 25 seconds to a minute, that are kind of nothing. There's the song, or the title, Junkie's Prayer, which is kind of like the Lord's Prayer, reworded for sort of maximum profanity and offensiveness that feels like an idea that didn't need to be on the album. That takes up 3 minutes of time. Baby Head is another one that seems like it's a live track that I don't love. Ass Whippin' is nothing in particular. Another just sort of interlude that is just whip cracking and people shouting out in pain. And so a lot of the stuff, you know, I feel like almost like they could have created another kick-ass 6-song EP out of sort of the best material out on the album, and it would be just a knockout, in my opinion. So Fishbone is a septet at this point. They added a member, I think, for this album. They had been a 6-piece up to this point. They are out of Los Angeles, forming in the early 80s, and so have sort of, you know, that punk ska feel that came out of, you know, the LA scene around that time. But they're not limited at all to just that. You know, they have a punk aesthetic. You could easily put them in with the punks, with the ska crowd, with the hard rock crowd, and funk. They really kind of bring it all in their sound and on this album. And the party jam is kind of the overall vibe is just of a party. And a lot of their best songs feel like party anthems, like Party at Ground Zero from that first EP, and Everyday Sunshine from this album, and Nasty Man, which I think other people think that that's maybe one of the throwaway tracks on this record. But I love, you know, it's just a lascivious song, you know, about getting it on, that I think is a lot of fun, and again, gets very chaotic. Pray to the Junkie Maker, which is what follows up that Junkie's Prayer. I think Pray to the Junkie Maker is a really great tune. And Fight the Youth was the other single, but it wasn't one that I heard around that time. And in fact, Everyday Sunshine and Sunless Saturday are the only singles that the band ever released that really got any traction whatsoever in any sort of charts. I think one went top 10 and one was like number 14 in the US modern rock tracks. And there are a few other tracks on here that I would consider full songs, even if they aren't necessarily my favorites. So Fight the Youth, that third single, which I think was actually the first single, but one that I didn't hear going around. Yeah, Those Days Are Gone. I mean, there are some just studio tracks, but I'm not a fan of feeling like when you're listening to the album you are losing minutes at a time to just sort of things happening between songs. And I get that feeling a lot when I listen to this album. So I kind of just pick out my favorites. I think Pray to the Junkie Maker, Sunless Saturday, Everyday Sunshine, and Nasty Man are probably my 4 favorites. And there's 3 or 4 other songs on there that seem to be sort of fully blown ideas songs and not just sort of skits or tidbits or sort of live interludes. But that said, in guessing the connection is specifically through the albums and not general to the band. It is the albums 10 and The Reality of My Surroundings, and it's actually kind of been pre-guessed almost, but I didn't change my connection. But some people had some thoughts going in the right direction, and I think if you just kind of look at these albums released across all platforms, you have a pretty good idea of what the connection is. And yeah, and if you have that guess, put it down in the comments. First one to get in will get a shout out on the next video, which will be on the Plastic Soundwave Cult on Monday, when Eric connects to The Reality of My Surroundings by Fishbone. In my mind, not a great album, but contains some absolutely great songs on it. And I know not every album has to be top to bottom songs that I love. There's plenty of albums that I hold very dear that have tracks that I'm no big fan of, but this seems to be particular this seems like a particular type of unnecessary bloat and indulgence that just kind of bothers me when I listen to it. It's one thing to have a song that doesn't quite hit. It's another thing to have just kind of things happening, which drives me nuts. So yeah, I will leave it there, I guess, and put that guess down in the comments, or tell me that you disagree. If you love the record top to bottom, I think I am in the minority in this one, but Fishbone never really got their super day in the sun. They never really charted any records that much anywhere. This album was their most successful chart-wise in the US, snuck into the top 50, I think topped out at number 49. But none of their records have been a top 40 record in their career. They're still around to this day, but I haven't really heard anything since this day. And yeah, so Reality of My Surroundings, 1991, connected to Pearl Jam's 10 albums. And with that, I've said my piece, so I thank you for watching. Bye-bye.